maaser. But here we're talking about 10%. There was a specific law of 10% of your crop, 10% of what grown in your property, you would have to give to the poor every third year and every sixth year. And now the question is, what happens before you separate that maaser? Before you take off that 10%, and what's the status with the rest of the food that you have, that you've cut? That you've cut a lot of grain. Let's say you cut 100 pounds of grain, and now you have you didn't take off the 10% for the poor person. Now we know if you cut 100 pounds of grain and you didn't take off the truma, you can't eat anything. All the food is considered not kosher food until you separate the truma. You can't eat the food. You can't eat anything that you cut in the grains unless truma was separated. The food that's before the truma was separated is called tevel. That food is forbidden to be eaten. Now, after you take off the truma, then you have to take off maaser to the Levi. The Levi gets 10% every year. If you take off the truma, but you didn't yet take off the Levi's portion, Mr. Tafti, what happens then? You also can't eat the crop. The crop is still not kosher. The food, all that grain is not kosher. It can't be eaten. It's called tevel until you remove the 10% for the Levi. Now the question is, what is the status of the grain? If you took off the truma, you gave to the Kohen his part. You gave to the Levi his 10%, but you didn't give to the poor person. What status does that food have? Do we say it's also tevel, you can't eat the food? Or do we say you owe money to the poor person, but technically the food in the property you could still eat. You can eat all the food in the property as long as, but you have to leave over. You have to give 10% to the poor person, but you have a right to eat it. This is one possibility that the Gemara says, and the Gemara understands that one rabbi understands that is the opinion of one of the rabbis. That Rabbi Eliezer holds that separating the 10% to the poor until you do that, the other food is not affected by the 10% that you have to give to the poor. Meaning, if you eat the other food, the rest of the crop, it's not tevel. It's not forbidden. It's not that the food is not kosher. The food became kosher, and so to speak, that you are allowed to eat food, allowed to start eating the food, even before you took off the maaser on it. Except you have a financial responsibility to give to the poor person his 10% of the crop. That is one way to look at it. The other opinion is, the Chacham hold, until you give the 10% to the poor person, it's tevel. The food is not kosher. You can't eat it. The rest, all the food is not kosher until you separate the 10% for the poor. That is what the Gemara had suggested. And then Gemara changed.
Rabbi, can
Yes.
you fix the
I can't hear you, Mr. Ajmi. I think we lost a little bit of the cell service. But that is the Gemara's. Then the Gemara's. Mr. Mark, you wanted to say something?
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Can't you fix the crops with money, even for the Kohen or the Levi? Can't fix it with money?
Meaning the question is, if he went ahead and he ate it all for himself. Listen, if the Kohen, the Kohen, you have to give the part of the crop to the Kohen. Maybe it's called, if you don't give to the Kohen and you ate it, if you ate tevel, so it's the prohibition has been done. Meaning he violated this prohibition. If a guy goes ahead and he eats the crop and he says, I'm going to give the Kohen money, that shouldn't be a substitute until because he must separate the grain itself and to give to the Kohen. He must separate
before he eats. Can he fix it with money?
I don't think so. I think he has to separate the actual grain. The grain itself has to be separated. That's what I would think. We don't, it's not like we find like some things we find, you redeem certain things. We don't, it doesn't seem like that we find this concept so much. We don't hear about redeeming the truma and giving it and putting it onto money. We find by Masa Sheni that we do find that the 10% that you have to take to Jerusalem of the crop every first and second, fourth and fifth year of the cycle, you take 10% and you bring to Jerusalem. That we say, if it's hard for you to carry the crop to Jerusalem, then we say you go ahead and you can redeem it onto money. Mark, you still there? You able to hear me?
Yeah, yes, I heard you, but I thought that's the same 10% you're talking about. I
No,
thought that's the same 10%.
No, that's Masa Shein. That's the 10% that belongs to you that you take to Jerusalem, that you redeem on money, and then you take that money and you bring it to Jerusalem and you spend and you buy certain things that on it and eating. And again, you have to eat the food there. You have to eat the food from the proceeds of the money that you had redeemed the crop with. You have to buy food and eat it in Jerusalem. That's Masa Sheni. But this we're talking about.
Got it. Okay, I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem. Clarification is always important. So now the Gemara says no. Another rabbi comes onto the scene. Another rabbi comes to the scene and he says no, and he brings a proof to his opinion that everybody agrees that if you do not take off Masa Sheni, if you don't take off Masa Ani, the 10% for the poor, the food is not kosher. The same way you can't eat the food until you take off the 10% for the Levi. Same way you can't eat the food until you go ahead and take off the Masa Sheni when you have to take 10% to bring it to Jerusalem. So too, during the year that you have to give 10% to the poor, the food is not kosher, it's tevel. Unless you take off the 10% for the poor, you can't eat the food. So the Gemara says, but where is there a dispute? There is a dispute whether the Gemara says if you buy from an Am Haaretz, if you buy produce from an Am Haaretz, an uneducated Jew, do you have to be concerned that he did not remove the truma, that he did not remove the maaseh or not? So you would say Jews in general, they keep Torah mitzvot, and you should not have to worry about anything. But we saw yesterday that Rashi quoted that Yochanan the Kohen Gadol made a survey. He sent a survey throughout the Jewish community, and he saw that there were a number of uneducated Jews that were not taking off the maaseh. They were not taking off the maaseh, and now we have a big problem. Because if you buy from the Am Haaretz food, and he did not take off the maaseh, so then the food is not kosher. So now the question is, how does the buyer protect himself that I don't want to eat something that's not kosher? So what did the rabbis do? They instituted a law. But one point I want to say, truma they gave. The Am Haaretz, the uneducated Jews, they gave truma. And it seems like why they gave truma, because truma is very simple. Truma, technically, 1 wheat kernel is enough, technically, Minat Torah. 1 wheat kernel is enough, good morning, Mr. Asmi, to fulfill your obligation of getting truma. Any amount of truma, any amount of wheat that you separate is good enough to give to the Kohen. The custom was the average guy would give 1/50th to the Kohen, 2%. 2% is not a significant amount. 10% is a much more significant amount. And therefore, when it came to truma, the uneducated Jews gave the 2%, but they did not give. They were not. Some of them, a minority. There was a minority of those people of the Am Haaretz that did not even that gave the 2%. Again, pretty much all of them gave the truma. We don't have to worry about the truma. Truma, we don't have to worry about. But what we have to worry about is the maaseh. is the 10% that goes to the Levi, the 10% that you have to take to Jerusalem, the 10% during the year of Maaseh Ani. That's going to be the discussion. We're going to be discussing about the 10% for the poor. So the Gemara says the following: if you go ahead and you bought, we had a machloket yesterday in the Gemara. If you go ahead and you buy food from the uneducated Jew, and you don't know, did he take off the maaser or did he not take off the maaser? We don't know. There's no way to know. So what do? We need to protect ourselves. So the rabbis say, to be safe, separate maaser, but you can keep it for yourself. What does that mean? Let's say you have to give every year 10% to the Levi. So you'll separate 10% of the crop, and you know what you'll do with it? You don't have to give it to the Levi. You can keep it for yourself. Why can you keep it for yourself? Because there's a rule when you have a question of money, Safek Mamon, who does this money belong to? You say the one, the Hamotzi Mechaveiro of Alaraya, the one who wants to take it out from the person who's holding the money. It's upon you to bring proof. The proof is on you. When I say the onus is on you, as the expression goes, if there's a question of money and I'm holding on to money in my pocket, you say that money is yours, prove it. So here we have a question: did the seller who sold me this crop, did he separate 10% for the Levi or not? If he separated and he gave 10% to the Levi is not owed any money. If he didn't separate 10%, he is owed the money. Now, the money is by me, meaning the question is, do I have to give money to the Levi because maybe the other guy did not separate? Or maybe I don't have to give money to the Levi because maybe he did separate. So now the question is the Levi owed money or not? We don't know. Does the money belong to the Levi or the money belongs to me? I bought the crop. Is it now? I'm holding the crop. It's a question of we have to give up something that's in my possession. So we say, the other guy has to bring proof. But it's possible the fact that the seller did not take off the maaser, on that possibility, if I needed to separate, Yud Zayin 17a, I needed to separate the maaser. Because what happens if the seller did not take off the maaser? Now this food is not kosher. If the seller, Jaime, am I being clear? Just want to know if it's clear, if any questions.
Yes, you're trying to figure out, the Gemara is trying to figure out that if you buy from someone and you have a doubt whether they took out the maaser, is it kosher or not kosher?
Right. So the rabbi said, because we found there's a minority of people that don't take off maaser, you got to play it safe. How do you play it safe? Separate maaser.
So separate maaser from what you bought?
From what you bought, exactly. You separate 10% what you bought.
No one should come on you.
Right. No one can make a claim. No Levi could come and say, Rabbi Friedman, give me the 10% that you separated. I say, hey, prove it that this 10% is yours. Maybe already was separated the 10%. Okay, if somehow we could prove that the seller didn't separate it, then I got to give it to the Levi.
No one came, no one made a claim. 90%. No one came, made a claim.
No one can. I eat it. I keep the 10%. It's a precaution. It's a safety just in case. I don't know if someone shows up. Even if I think it's more than someone showing up. That 10% is just to make sure that in case the seller didn't separate 10%, I now have removed any not kosher aspect to it. But there's two issues. It could be more, because maybe that 10% was right. So that's a money question. So we have to separate the money question for the kashrus question. There's a question of being kosher or not kosher. Yeah, but we can't make it in cash, but we have to do this actual separating of the, but again, so we have an interesting phenomenon. You could say that I separate it, but yet I could keep it for myself. Because there's two types of safek, two types of questions in halacha. Maybe there's more. But we'll focus on two different types. One is a question of money, and one is a question, one in the sense of something being kosher or not kosher. When you have a food in front of you and you want to know if this food is kosher or not kosher, that's not a money question. That's a kashrut question. This is the question of is this, so when we have a kashrut question, we're going to be strict. And we're going to do what we can to make sure we're eating kosher.
Rabbi, I have a question for you. It's a little off topic, but not really. In the Gemara, did you come across any instances of resentment of giving the maaser? Like, did people look at the maaser as the IRS, or did they look at it as something holy where they're supporting the Leviim to do Hashem's work?
I think that the problem with the Amei Haaretz, the uneducated Jews, there was a minority of them. The majority of even the uneducated Jews were happy to give the maaser. But there was a minority, a strong minority, I'm not saying it was 49%, but there was a minority that they found weren't giving it. And it would seem that they weren't giving it because they weren't ready to depart. It was like the IRS type of idea that people don't want to give, so they want to give away so much. And therefore they gave away the truma, but it would seem we could see more if there are other explanations for that, but it would seem that they would not, why they don't want to give away. Let's say on the third and sixth year, morning Nathan, it's 20% giveaway, almost 20%. It's 10% to Mr. Batesh who just walked in, to Nathan, and then there's 10% to the poor of the crop. So that's a large amount. So 2% to the Kohen, we'll deal with. We can give the Kohen 2%. But the other years, they weren't ready to give 10% to the Levi the other years. And even the 10%, it seems that even the 10% to take to Jerusalem, they didn't want to get busy. They didn't want to get so busy with it and go to Jerusalem and take the food to Jerusalem. They didn't appreciate maybe enough that they get, and therefore the minority of these Amei Haaretz, these uneducated Jews, see, if you would educate the Jews, then they would give it. They would do it. The problem is they're uneducated, right, Mr. Asprey? The key is
so the rule
education.
Is that you have to give 10% from what you buy to erase the possibility that the producer didn't give his 10%.
Right, but you have to separate. You have to separate. There's two things. You don't have to actually give it, because giving it is a monetary question. Who does it belong to? You see this. Right. Let me give a nice case to make it clear. Let's say a person who knows the laws of the maaser. If I go ahead and I have a pile of 100 pounds of grain, and once I separate, I don't even have to give it yet to the Levi. Once it's separated, then 90 pounds is good. Ready to roll. I could use it. Even though I didn't bring it to Mr. Batesh yet. Nathan did not receive, the Levi didn't receive it, but the separation, that official designation or separation, by separating it, now the rest of the grain is kosher, right, Nathan? Right. Now the question, do I have to give it to Levi, to Mr. Batesh, or not? That's a monetary question. Because I could keep it. I don't have to. The rabbis say I can actually use this 10% that I actually I refer to it as maaser, since the seller might have already gave Nathan the 10%. The seller might have already gave the Levi 10%. If it's my crop, I know it wasn't given. I gotta give it to him. And I can't give money instead. And I gotta give him the crop. But when it's a question whether the seller already gave Mr. Batesh the 10%, now it comes to Rabbi Friedman. Rabbi Friedman, you just bought from that Amei Haaretz, and Mr. Batesh can't say, Rabbi, I heard you separated maaser that you bought from the Amei Haaretz. Please give me that 10%. I say, Mr. Batesh, maybe the Amei Haaretz, maybe the uneducated Jew already gave you the 10%. You can't double dip, Nathan. You can't get double. It's enough you got, happy for you that you got the 10%. Now you want to take another 10%? Maybe you got it already. So maybe you got it already is a monetary question. But it's a kashrut question. It's the question of kashrut, but you know what? There's a possibility that the seller did not take off the 10%. And then if the seller didn't take off 10%, all the food is not kosher. I made it kosher by separating the 10%. I could keep it myself because eat it, enjoy it. Because it's kosher. Because like any time you have a suffix mamon, does this money belong to me? Or does it belong to Nisim? It might belong to Nisim, the money, but we have a rule. If it's not clear who the money belongs to, and if the money is by me, you have to prove it. We don't know what happened here. You have to, and if you don't, you can't prove it. Some way it seems like this is not something you can really prove whether do what you want. Throw it back in and eat it. It's all kosher because you removed the possible violation that it was the Maisa wasn't taken off. But when it comes to the monetary obligation, it's upon the Levi to prove that he was not given 10%. And since he cannot prove it, I have a right to keep it for myself. That's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara has a question whether the Gemara has a question, if I buy food from the Amoretz, from the uneducated Jew, which I have to separate the 10% for the Levi and keep it for myself, what about the 10% for the poor? The 10% that goes to the poor on year 3 and year 6 of the cycle, do I do the same exact thing that I did for the Levi stuff, the Ma'aser Rishon? Same thing. I bought from the uneducated Jew. I don't know. The same way I don't know. Did he give 10% to the Levi? I don't know if he gave 10% to the poor person. So you would think we have to join some. Mike, Mr. Silverman is coming on. You would think that you would have to give 10%. Do the same thing. Separate 10% because we don't know whether he gave the 10% to the poor person. You would think do the same thing. Separate 10% and then keep it for yourself. Right? The same way we don't know whether. Good morning, Mr. Silverman. Morning.
Morning, Rabbi.
The same way we don't know whether you accept the person who you bought it from, the Amoretz, did he give 10% to the Levi? We don't know whether he gave 10% to the poor. So the Chachamim say, what did the Chachamim say? The Chachamim say that year the buyer, every year of the 6 years, the Levi gets 10%. Every year he gets 10%. The only year he doesn't get 10% is Shemitah year. Everybody, it's up to everybody. Because it doesn't belong to me, it belongs to everybody. So every year it's 10 and 10. The question is who gets the second 10%? The first 2 years of the cycle, the owner himself keeps the second 10, but he has to do, but it's called Masa Sheni. The second 10% has to go to Jerusalem. He has to eat it in Jerusalem. Him, his kids, whatever he wants, it has to be eaten in Jerusalem.
So that's like 20%. That's like that. That's why really the Maaseh is 20%, Rabbi.
Right, but the second 10%, Mr. Silverman, belongs to you in the first and second and fourth and fifth year of the cycle. Yes, it is a separation. I had to be involved with 20%, but at least I got the 10%. I got that second 10%.
That one you could use.
I could redeem onto cash, but then I got to take if I was too hard with it, big Jerusalem, and then buy food. Then buy food with the cash there. And
this was enacted to beautify Yerushalayim and the Beit HaMikdash.
Right. Mr. Silverman is saying a very important point. I think the Sefer Chinuch talks about it, about the idea of the Masa Sheni. We spoke the other day about taking 10% to Jerusalem. There's an idea of inspiration for the family, that you have to be in Jerusalem. You're going to eat in Jerusalem. You're going to be spending time. The Holy Sanhedrin, the greatest court is there. And or the greatest chachamim, the greatest rabbis are there, and it's a place of learning, education. And you'll come back home and you'll teach the family. But Mr. Silverman's pointing at a different point. When everybody has to go to the old city, that's going to make the old city a thriving place. It's going to be a hustling and bustling place. Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome Emmanuel. It's going to make this old city it's going to make it a very honorable city. In a certain sense, Lahavdil, New York, London, all these places, because there's so much commerce, there's so much going on there, that makes the city that's alive and kicking. Jerusalem,
Michael, the rabbi said the Am Haaretz, some had a view that this is just like tax, and they avoided paying it because they resented it because it was like IRS tax.
Yeah, of course, that's where the tax comes from. It's all copies the Torah.
And that's what happens. If Jerusalem becomes a much happening place. And therefore that lends honor to Jerusalem when it's and the industry, the economy. It affects the whole economy of Jerusalem, and that will.
Rabbi, is that why certain things, the food had to be brought to Jerusalem to be eaten there to bring that thriving atmosphere?
Exactly. And people coming, it's going to create. Yeah. It's going to make a whole thing. And like
you eat there, you eat there, you drink there.
Right.
If you couldn't bring the animals that you had or the fruits, you would change it for money, and you go spend the money there.
Right.
Like what we
By
do.
the way. Yeah, right. But there was a charge. If you had to pay an extra charge if you redeemed it onto money.
Shipping and handling, Mike. Shipping and handling.
There was a fifth. That it add a fifth. For,
Jerusalem tax. Jerusalem tax.
For not bringing the actual stuff itself.
So wait, listen. You're getting taxed to give more tzedakah, to get more beracha.
Oh, very good. Very good. So the Gemara, the Chachamim said, what did the Chachamim say? One of you though. So the Chachamim said that the same way you have to separate the 10% for the Levi and then keep it for yourself, because maybe he already gave the 10%, you have to do the same thing when it comes to the ani, the Maisa ani, the 10% for the poor. Separate the 10%, but then you can keep it for yourself. But what does, but there's another rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer says that you do not even need to separate the 10% for the poor. He says, you don't have to worry about that. Why don't you have to worry about the 10% for maybe, good morning, Simon. Maybe the person did not, maybe the person I bought it from, the Am Haaretz, did not separate the 10% for the poor. And if you didn't separate 10% for the poor, then the food is not kosher. Because we have established, the second rabbi said, unless you separate the Masa Ani, until you separate the 10% for the poor, the food is not kosher. So maybe the food is not kosher. Maybe he didn't separate the 10% for the poor. Why is it that I don't need to separate? Why the buyer, the buyer, according to Rabbi Eliezer, does not have to worry about the 10% for the poor? Why not? What's the next we were up to in the Gemara on Yud Zayin Amud Aleph on 17a? In the art scroll, most probably it's 17a 1.
Yeah. In the bottom, left side bottom.
Okay, so the Gemara says, V'hacha b'haka mifilgi. They're arguing in the following. You have it, V'hacha b'haka mifilgi. They're arguing in the following. Like Mr. Silverman said, the bottom, first column, 17a1. What are they arguing? They're arguing in Ma'asava lo nechshitu ame aretz al masa'ani shel demai. The one rabbi holds that the Amo Aretz, the uneducated Jew, we're not worried about him taking off the Masa Sheni Shel Demai. He's going to go ahead, the uneducated Jew, the same way he takes off the Truma, and he goes ahead and he gives it to the Kohen, the 10% for the poor, he's not going to give, but at least he will separate that. That he doesn't look at as a big deal. Why? He'll separate the 10% for the poor and he'll keep it for himself. He'll keep it for himself. He's going to want to be, he'll be concerned. I gotta go ahead and the food won't be kosher if I don't separate the 10%. So he'll separate the 10%. But when it comes to stealing, taking something, good morning everybody, Mr. Feldman and Emmanuel, but keeping the money for himself is not, sometimes people are more worried about kosher and not kosher than worried about whether the money, whether it's my money or not his money. When it comes to, sometimes he'll be very careful. He might be careful about kosher, but he might not be so careful in honesty when it comes to financial, even though usually it goes hand in hand. Usually people, if you're careful about kosher, that means you have a level of being a God-fearing person. So then hopefully you'll be careful about when it comes to money dealings, if you owe money to someone. But there's some people that are, they have it ingrained in them. They make it kosher. First of all, it's no sweat. I make the food kosher, all 100 pounds kosher, by just separating 10% for the poor, by just making this official separation. But when it comes to money, that's the harder thing. To depart with money, it's a harder thing for some people. So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer says, the uneducated Jew, The same way he's worried about, he'll give 2% for the Kohen. He has some conscience. He'll separate 10% for the poor. But you know what he'll do with it? He'll keep it for himself. But he needed to separate the 10% for the poor just to make that official separation in order to make the rest of the food kosher. So it cost him nothing.
Like challah, Rabbi. Like challah.
Right,
Similar
right.
to like challah.
Right. And challah, you have to give to the... Right. Oh, very good. So it cost him nothing. So Mark is saying, so what? But it cost him nothing for the Levi. Right. Very good. Right. 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 But the answer is the Levi's money is a little more detailed. Why? Because when you give 10% to the Levi, separate 10% to the Levi, then there's something else you got to do above that. You got to separate 10% from the Levi's
To the coin.
You have to go to the Trumat. It's called Trumat Maaseh. Nathan, Mr. Bitesh, the Levi has to take 10% of what he got and give to the Kohen. So even the part when he separates for the Levi, there's more detail what has to be done.
There's 10%. There's 10% coming out of that. 10% coming. What he gave to the Levi, another 10% coming out of that.
And therefore, he's not. He doesn't.
I have to separate that percent because I don't know if people.
Right.
One for the Levi and one's for the Ani.
Right.
So now all of a sudden, to the Levi, you're gonna say it's not okay. You have to do it. But now you say when it comes to the money, we're not worried about it.
Because the question here is, did the seller, the question is, it's all about here, it's all about the seller. Do we have to be concerned that the seller did not separate? Which type are we concerned that the seller didn't separate?
Ani.
The Chacham say we're worried about everything. We're worried about the poor person. He didn't separate this one. He didn't separate for the Levi. He didn't separate for the poor. And therefore, I got to go ahead and do both. I, the buyer, out of concern, have to separate for the poor person. For the Levi. What? It cost me nothing. Maybe the only thing it might cost me is maybe when I separate the 10% for the Levi, I have to take away 10% of that for the Kohen. That's Trumat Maaseh. That will, because that has holiness to it. Because true in contrast to food that goes to the Levi, when Nathan's food could be eaten by anybody, but the Kohen's food cannot be eaten by anybody. So the 10% that I give to when Nathan takes 10% as a Levi, when he has to separate 10%, that 10% has holiness, and that can't be eaten by everybody. So therefore,
anything given to the Kohen is holy. Anything given to the Kohen is holy.
Right. So therefore, that's why the Gemara. So now the question is: here we're looking in the mindset of the seller. What's happening by the seller? The uneducated Jew. How will he go ahead? Will he separate the 10% for the poor and keep it for himself? Or will we say he will not separate the 10% for the poor at all? That's the question. So one rabbi said, so look at the language of the Gemara. Because the only issue here is money. And if the only issue here is money, he's going to go ahead and he'll separate it. He'll take 10% and he'll keep it for himself. But when it comes to the other thing, when it comes to the Levi, the 10% for the Levi, where it's not just a money issue, there's also the 10% that has to go to the Kohen, so he's not going to touch it. Similarly, in the years of Ma'aseh Sheni, when you have to take 10% to Jerusalem, he's not going to do that. He doesn't want to get busy going to Jerusalem, taking 10% of his crop to Jerusalem. So he's not. So we suspect. It's a trust thing. That's the case of Choshe, like Choshe B'Shir. We suspect he didn't take off the 10% to bring to Jerusalem. We suspect he didn't take the 10% to give to the Levi. But we don't. But we're not suspect. He'll separate for the Ani. He'll separate 10% for the poor, and you know he'll do with it. He'll keep it for himself. But he separated. Therefore, we don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about that. That was already done.
Yeah, but what do you do? But what do you do about the Kohen and the Levi? kodashim, kadashim.
Right, but here we're talking, right, so therefore, over here, the Truma, we say, Mr. Silverman, that he gave the Truma. The Amoret, since Truma is only 2%, he's not afraid to give the 2%. We don't have to worry about that. We have to worry about maybe he didn't take off the 10% for the poor, and we have to worry, or 10% for the Levi. And here is the question: do we have to worry about, did he take 10% for the poor? And that's the machlokas. So the first opinion says we don't suspect, he will remove the 10%, make it kosher, and then keep it for himself.
It's Rabbi
And the
Eliezer.
other opinion, Rabbanan Savi Kivin the Tricheli Milta Lo Mafresh. He's not even going to separate the 10% for the poor. And the Rabbanan say, therefore, he's not going to separate 10% for the poor, and therefore you also have to separate the 10% for the poor. Okay, I want to wish everyone a beautiful Shabbat. We'll be back on Monday. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shabbat
Thank you.
shalom.
Thank you very much. Shabbat shalom.
You too.
Thanks.
Beautiful
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom,
shalom to
Rabbi.
everybody.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom,
shalom,
Rabbi.
everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, H.
Thank you.
You got credit